Gonna try to keep a minimal stream here, guys. Keep things fast and not getting frozen tonight. All right, Stony Progressive, welcome in. Sunday interview, late night show. As I say, usually I am a bartender. I am working late. I am coming home, setting this up. So it's gonna be a late stream. We're doing a lot of. It's busy season, so busy season here. I am going to be late most nights, so let's just everybody get on board. We're going to be toasting one up here and hitting some news. Interview Sunday. I want to start out with what I would say is a big story right now is the censorship around the world. It seems to be a back and forth battle of censorships, really. We got Russia censoring Facebook. We got America censoring anything that has to do with our Russian anything at all. Like you said, like I mean, Tolstoy is getting censored. Like what the fuck is happening, guys? Canceling an entire group of people because there's military conflict at the moment. What the fuck is happening, guys? Come on. Let's some rational thought here for 1 minute. So yeah, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at massive censorship across the planet, across the globe. Everybody's censoring everybody, and our interviews are going to start there because I think that is important. The unregulated censorship of the planet right now, and people are okay with it. People are okay with the censorship. So there's been my favorite person in the spectrum, the comic news spectrum is Lee Camp. I do prefer him over Jimmy Dore. No offense to anybody or whatever. Everybody has their personal opinions, views, everything, right? So let's not get mad for 1 second. I am gonna go see Jimmy again. I've seen Lee Camp twice in person. I'm now gonna be seeing Jimmy for the second time. I'm super stoked, but I do prefer Lee, and he keeps things a little more rational a lot of the times, and he has been censored. His YouTube page has been taken down all across Europe, and his he was on RT, so he has been taken off of TV. His show has been completely canceled. His show has been taken off of YouTube, and because his show was on RT, it's now not on YouTube. And his channel has been super censored, and he is going his rounds. He's doing the rounds on a lot of left leaning independent news people, and he's been doing the rounds trying to talk about what's going on. So this was one, and it's with Rania Klee, who we trust. So let's sit back, Blaze, and check this out.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unauthorized Disclosure Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Rania Kalik. Hey Rania.
Hey Kevin.
And in between us, you'll see, although we don't usually like to do it this way anymore, so let me get it right. And
I liked being in between you. That was pretty hot.
we gladly go in the closet with you, Lee.
An unauthorized disclosure sandwich.
But we have a Lee Camp comedian who's here to talk about. I don't know what are we talking about? I don't know.
Is there anything in particular? Like I don't know. We were like really struggling. We were like, what should we talk about on today's show?
Wasn't Snooki making a comeback? Is that what you wanted to talk about?
That's a pretty big thing.
I think there's some big Ben Affleck news. Do you have any updates on his relationship status?
Right.
No, you're here because your network where you were employed 8 years, you've been the host of Redacted tonight, and RT America has shut down or is shutting down. I don't know if the process is entirely complete, but effectively, you've all been laid off. Anybody who was an employee, that includes Chris Hedges, who had a show, Jesse Ventura had a show.
I just want to point out that there's like Jesse, Chris, Lee all have shows, but RT America is a huge network. There was like lots of people working in production and administrative capacity and like audio, camera, like just like any other major television network. It was like a building with a huge staff, and all those people are now out of a job. And so I guess Lee, like obviously this is connected to the recent war in Ukraine. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened? We know RT in general is like under insane amount of pressure right now. It's been shut down, which shockingly, very swiftly shut down across all of Europe. And I'm in Lebanon, but for whatever reason, Lebanon is not Europe, but I can't access any of the RT Twitter accounts. They're all inaccessible, but it's bizarre because it has a thing saying you can't access this in Europe, and I'm like, I'm not in Europe. But anyway, we know it's been taken off of Google completely. All of RT and Sputnik. The level of censorship is actually really like alarming. But also the sanctions that have been placed on Russia. I imagine that played into this decision as well. But can you tell us a little bit from your perspective about what happened? It must have been like a whirlwind of a week for you to just kind of overnight have your job taken away.
Yeah, it really was almost kind of instantaneous. On Wednesday of this past week, the managers walked in and said, "We're not airing anything today, and we'll let you know what's going on tomorrow." And then we walk in on Thursday, and they have a meeting where they say it's all over. See you later. Pack up your stuff. We were given no explanation or anything. But I will give you my theories, which, if you read the mainstream media about why RT America shut down, they're just acting like, oh, they lost their platform. DirecTV pulled out or dropped them. So did Roku. And that's why they shut down. The free market just shut them down. I think that's utter bullshit because first of all, they had plenty of other platforms. They're big online. They have a big online presence and everything. So there are places that stuff would have, the shows would have continued to air. So the idea that just losing DirecTV, destroyed them instantly is I think laughable. And then also, in terms of funding, like the sanctions on Russian banks, I don't even think have kicked in yet. And even if they had, apparently RT America, which is owned by an American company called TNR, had enough money to operate for several months, if not a year. So I don't think it was like an instantaneous.
TNR. I did not know that. That's funny. So RT America, again, just a company. So yeah, TNR. I'm looking that up, and it does not come up. All right, whatever. Tried. An American company owns RT America, and it still got shut down as a Russian fucking state. Jesus.
We don't have the money.
Come on.
And I think it almost had to be some sort of like Justice Department phone call or U.S. government phone call at some level that said you're done. Because, and again, I have no inside knowledge about that. I could be wrong, but it just seems like the other explanations about like, oh, they were just having a tough time. Because if that were true, they would have pulled aside certain talents that they wanted to keep and said, hey, we got to go on hold for a little while. Maybe we'll be back in a week, maybe a month. But there was none of that. It was just done. And yeah. And I think it sets a very dangerous precedent in terms of banning just adversarial viewpoints, opposing viewpoints. And again, people may want to think that RT America just said, oh, this war is great, Putin's right. But in fact, RT America had a lot of different voices on there. I never said this war was right. I said the invasion was wrong, even though I gave the context for why it's happening, the expansion of NATO, the Nazi forces in Ukraine, etc. But that was what was great about RT America, is it had a bunch of different viewpoints. But what united all these very different...
It actually was a 2-point. It allowed both. It actually allowed. I'm gonna say it allowed all four, what you would call all four perspectives, which would be, in my opinion, in America's eyes. I'm trying to think like American culture here. We're looking at center left, which is Democrat, center right, which is Republican, far right, which is libertarian and alternative right, I guess, and far left, which is progressive, Green Party area, and Antifa or whatever. So you had those two far things, and they actually had people from all four sections. They had people that would report on all four areas. They had independents, they had libertarians, they had progressives, they had kind of Democrats, they had kind of Republicans. Like, they had people from all groups. No other news station had that. No one. Fucking no one.
on RT America was they were almost all outside of the Overton window, the allowable thought on corporate airwaves, on U.S. Media platforms. They were outside of that, and that's why I was doing my show there, and I knew I couldn't do it anywhere else in terms of a large network. And so, yeah, it really sets a dangerous example of just when America is struggling on getting a really kind of large-scale propaganda push out, they're worried people might find out the truth, and so they have to shut down opposing viewpoints. And real quick, last thing is, this was cross-platform, coordinated in the span of 1 week. RT America shut down. Of course, my show is canceled. And my personal podcast called Moment of Clarity was yanked from Spotify, and all of Redacted Tonight videos can't be viewed on YouTube, can't be viewed in Europe or UK. And that all happened in the span of really like 3 days.
That's just wild. And I just want to I just want to say that even if it,
I don't know who the guy in the. I guess I'm only familiar with Rania, and she actually, I think, reported it with RT for a little while, or Telesur or something. She reported with one of the independents as well, so she is familiar with that situation.
just that DirecTV and Roku had dropped RT, and that was the reason, although I agree with you, that doesn't sound plausible. Even if that was the reason, those who are arguing that that's just like, oh, the free marketplace, said no to RT, that's still a form of censorship. Like, deplatforming is still a form of censorship, and those companies did that under extreme pressure, and like
They did it all together. Like they do it like uniformly all at once to the same people. It's insane. That's not just censorship. That is taking down. I don't know. Like, that's not just censorship, okay? So when you lose that many different platforms in one swoop, that's not censorship. That is more than censorship. That's
moderating campaigns and lobbying. So even for those people, because I saw some people making the argument that if that's really why RT America shut down, it's not censorship. It absolutely is.
it's beyond. It's so
You like
far
this guy?
beyond.
Yeah, so actually, like I
Yes.
I like Matt Binder. I know him and I like him, but yeah, I just disagree with him here. I saw him say that, and I was like, dude, like that is a form of censorship. That absolutely is a form of censorship.
And it's just false. Like as if the network found out people didn't like them and just shut down everything in the span of 1 hour. Like, oh, I guess people don't like it.
Just for our listeners, Ronnie, let me read the tweet just so people who don't end up watching can hear. He said, "Do people not realize?"
I guess this is also a podcast, which most professionals do. This is all just fun for us, right, guys? But yeah, this is a podcast, so they have to read it too. But we can read it on here, right? Yeah, you guys can read it. This is just wild, man. Like, they took down RT, like Chris Hedges RT. Now, I've heard people try to argue in the past. I actually have a friend, and maybe he's a stoner enough that if he's watching this later, or he's watching it now, he doesn't remember this, but he told me RT was Russian propaganda, and I was like, dude, no. And I kind of had a little snap moment. I'm like, nope, no, you cannot tell me that, because you no. RT is not propaganda, because they allow people who weren't allowed to speak the truth, like Chris Hedges and Ed Schultz. I'm so sorry. Fucking sleep in the office while I've been sick lately. Ed Schultz, who recently passed. God, he was a truth teller, guys. And if you're gonna pretend like the truth teller like him wasn't on a station that was allowing him to speak, then you're bullshit, okay? Because yeah, Ed Schultz was great, and Chris Hedges is he's better than anybody else that was on TV, and they shut him down. They censored the hell out of him, and censorship is bullshit. Just like yeah, I don't think any voices should be censored. Okay, so if you disagree with somebody, that's fine. Try to break down their bullshit. If you think that they're talking lies, try to break it down. Don't censor them. Don't delete them. And if a network, whatever, it's just, there's people on RT I did not like, and I actually got a little heated when I saw them. And there's other people that I could disagree and agree with, like Crosstalk. Crosstalk was great. Crosstalk was so good for a debate and a conversation, and they would have people on from alternative perspectives, and they would actually talk it out. And we've lost it.
America wasn't banned or censored. Why are they talking like it was? Continue.
I do think that eventually we'll find out probably more about why this happened. But there is something to be said about the fact that we know RT America was forced to register as a foreign agent a few years back.
They were the first and only two, but now they do Telesur and Al Jazeera. They both of them are now foreign agents as well, because Telesur is based out of Venezuela, and Al Jazeera is based out of, oh shit, is that Jordan? If somebody knows, please let me know.
Under like the crazy atmosphere of Russiagate.
The first ever media outlet to be forced to do that.
Right, which, yeah. And then we also know that the Justice Department has not relented in their ongoing attack on RT America, as well as other outlets in the U.S. We just don't see it or hear about it in the media. But it will be interesting to find out why this decision was made when it was, because you're also right that a lot of these various outlets, whether it's RT America or RT International or Rupley or Redfish or Mafic, which I used to work for, all of these outlets have budgets for like 6 months to a year. So even if it was the issue of sanctions, it wouldn't happen overnight like this. And I just wanted to make that comment, but I'm sure.
Yeah, and just real quick, for people who don't know what I do and never heard of my stuff, it's a comedy news show, but it brought in, it's anti-imperialist, anti-war, anti-capitalist, and just those talking points, even though it's a comedy show, is kind of what made it dangerous, I guess, in a way. And it sucks to think we live in a world now where you're really, even in the United States, you're not allowed to have those viewpoints, at least not on a large platform, and they just have to be knocked out. And I have never been censored at RT America. I was never told to say anything, never told I can't say anything. Ben Swan, who worked as a reporter and an anchor for a long time,
he was another one that was just. Ben Swan is a libertarian. I don't agree with him on a lot of opinions that he has, but when it comes to facts, he's a fantastic investigative journalist. Fantastic. Amazing. And yes, you know what? He when he comes to his conclusion, or he puts all the facts together, and then he sets his opinion at the end, I sometimes disagree with him. But as far as all the facts, you can't debate what he comes up with, okay? So, another fantastic person.
Tweet out that he's worked at NBC, CBS, and Fox News and RT America, and the most freedom by far that he had was at RT. So it's just laughable that, like, oh, RT is this, draconian, crazy place where they just tell everyone on screen to repeat lies. No, really, it's the reverse, that we had immense freedom there, and CNN does not.
I'd like to go back to the foreign agents issue, because I think it's actually really important for people to understand what the government here in the U.S. has been trying to do to people at outlets like RT America. And I'll put up this as an example. So this is, she has a very popular account. I have no idea how this woman ended up getting like nearly 500,000 people to follow her. But she wrote, to give you an idea of how huge this is, RT America was the single largest recipient of foreign agent designated funding in the United States from 2016 to 2021. And she puts foreign agent in quotes, which I suppose I should give her credit for that. And there's a good reason for why she's doing that, because it's bullshit to label it like that. And I'll get to that. But they received over $100 million from the Russian government during that time period. Okay, so I just want people to know that this, and by the way, she comes from, right now, she's working at a Pentagon-funded applied research laboratory for intelligence and security project at the University of Maryland on her postdoctoral. So just so you know where this is all coming from, she's funded by the Pentagon. And so we can take that down.
Thank you.
The Committee to Protect Journalists, who I've been highly critical of because they won't label Julian Assange a jailed journalist in their index of people who are being kept imprisoned. They actually called this out because foreign news outlets in the United States have been forced to register as foreign agents. There's a state-funded CGTN from China that's been made to register.
I don't think BBC has it?
Nope.
Of course not. No, it's not even, yeah.
Deutsche Welle does not, from Germany, and then CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation from Canada, they don't have to register, but they did get to Al Jazeera. And you know what happens is people who were with these networks they had their press passes revoked and lost access to Capitol Hill.
Right.
So anyways, anything you want to say to that, Lee Camp, because this is actually a new development in our crackdown on press freedom, along with like the war on whistleblowers and other things that we can speak of from the Obama and Trump era.
The foreign agent registry is hilarious on so many levels. So that happened under Trump, but it was the Foreign Agent Act, or whatever the name of the act is, was created to have lobbyists for other countries have them be forced to register as lobbyists for other countries. And it was, I believe, created in the 60s, and it was initially meant for lobbyists for Israel to register as foreign agents. AIPAC never has, though. It never actually happened. And so AIPAC, the largest probably lobbying firm for another country in America, has never registered as foreign agents.
Fantastic.
But it was never intended and had never been used against media outlets because they're not media outlets are not lobbyists. They're not sitting in the senator's office trying to tell them that they need to do this for their country or whatever for another country. And so it had never happened until RT. But they wanted to continue this McCarthyist push under Trump, the Russiagate bullshit and everything. By the way, I despise Trump, but Russiagate was hilarious and pathetic lies from our media. But so they forced they forced RT to register as foreign agent. They forced several other networks from other countries, but of course don't force, like you said, the ones that are so-called allies, BBC, CBC, so many others. Those don't have to register as foreign agents. And they were told, RT America was told at the time, that this would not impact their ability to be at press events and interview politicians and things. And I think within a week afterwards, they revoked all the press credentials. So it served multiple purposes, but one of the key ones was to make sure that these outlets could not actually question our politicians or be in any of the rooms where there are big announcements being made, et cetera.
It also seems to be like a lot of these policies, whether from forcing RT to register as a foreign agent, or whether it was slapping these labels on whether like on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, slapping these Russia affiliated or Russia controlled media labels onto not just the accounts of the actual outlets, but the last couple of weeks they started doing it to actual individuals who work for these outlets, which is just completely insane to mark an individual that way with the scarlet letter of Russia affiliated media. But a lot of this seems
coming in from both sides here. All right. Yeah, no, we definitely need some healing. We need some trust. And people are not born bad. Russian people are not bad. There's millions upon millions. There's hundreds of millions of Russians, right? Like they're not, or 100 million Russians, 140 million Russians in Russia, and then however many spread across the planet. Russian people aren't bad. People aren't bad. It's the Russian government that's bad. It's the American government that's bad, not American people. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of things here, and people are getting very up in arms over things. It's like they're again. I'm just trying to, like, they're taking down Tolstoy in universities and shit. Like, one of the greatest writers ever because he's connected to a Russian. Sometimes we really need to detach certain things, and yeah, the word Russian doesn't make anybody bad. And no, people are not born bad. There's so many Um, yeah, I mean, I worked in Charlotte right next to where they let off criminals, and like literally, you would every couple weeks you'd have homeless prisoner, ex-prisoners coming out and just asking to like if they can clean the bathrooms or something for $20 because nobody you can't get a freaking job with the word prisoner attached to your history. It's we don't have a good system, guys, and the system corrupts the mind because there's a lot of people that actually think this way now.
Have been designed also to deny RT and other outlets like it the staff they need to even function. Because I know when there was the FARA registration, people quit because it's scary. It's like I don't want to. I don't want to be considered working for a foreign agent. Like
Yeah.
that's a scary label. You don't know. Like it sounds scary. You don't know. You might be scared of the repercussions of that. And then of course, watching people get labeled. Nobody wants to get labeled. So I imagine there was probably people quitting over these things too, which may have played into shutting down. I don't know, Lee. That's like another theory that I've heard.
Well, yeah, I can tell you that many people did quit at RT America recently, and from this angle, I understand it. In that I was at RT America for a very clear reason. I knew that I create a TV show that cannot be allowed on your mainstream airwaves, and this was the only place, at least on a large platform, that I could create such a show. Especially an expensive show with $1 million cameras and stuff like that. That was the only place I could do it, and have so much freedom, the complete freedom to say what I wanted. And so I knew why I was there, and I think all my correspondents, the people on camera, knew why they were there. But for people that are just crew, just a camera guy or just someone working in the makeup room, they just took a job, and so for them, it's not like they weren't there because they were like, well, I'm a leftist, and this is.
Yeah, I mean, creators, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that guy's just a union, mid-level pay job, so he does. Most of them probably don't even. They're not even paying attention to what they're doing half the time, and that's fair. I mean, they're not there for that. They're clocking in and clocking out. They probably see 4 shows, 5 shows a day. They don't care what one they're watching.
The only place I can do leftist makeup. So
right, leftist makeup.
So it's understandable that when all this pressure comes down and they have family members and stuff buying into the garbage being sold by Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, whatever, and saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe you work for that horrific horror show over there," it makes sense that many would quit. However, if people say that RT shut down because they didn't have staff, I also think that is not true because they still had enough staff to put on shows and. Even if they needed to,
still dealing with that.
So low, they needed to decrease the number of
lemon
shows.
OG.
They still would have kept things going. They would have kept some things
soft
going.
Wax.
Like, let's say the news. Maybe they would have cut back to just being RT News instead of having shows like mine. But none of that happened. It was instantaneous, which again makes me think it came from somewhere else.
Something bigger was going on, yeah.
And it's worth acknowledging that the decisions that have been taken, which are extraordinary, to engage in this censorship. To suspend access to Sputnik and RT and these other outlets in Europe first and foremost, and then now these sanctions that are having some impact, and the conditions, the Cold War atmosphere that it clearly led to the end of RT America here in the United States. It's being reciprocated by the Russian government in their country. I just would like to quickly read some of the outlets that have been affected. There are independent media that you could expect to face a crackdown, just like we're going to face a crackdown here for having having ideas, having views against our own government. But the BBC has had to pack it up. Radio Liberty, Voice of America, these are propaganda networks of the United States government that are funded. They put out U.S. state-funded media into for a Russian audience. Deutsche Welle, we've already mentioned, doesn't have to register as a foreign agent in the U.S., but they have had to leave. And then, of course, BBC has actually seized transmission into Russia. And then, like I said, there's a bunch of different independent groups that have done media that are under attack. But this is all I'm not saying it's entirely a response because war results in its own level of internal repression. But a lot of this didn't happen until the West decided to come down on RT's networks.
Yeah, it's a dangerous tit for tat in many different realms, whether it be news networks or online internet freedom or cracking down on protesters or etc. But yeah, you see these things spiral out of control, which is why people are warning that, this what's going on in Ukraine, both the U.S., UK, EU expansion that has threatened Russia's national security and Russia's invasion, like that puts us closer to nuclear war in a very severe way. And you have all these people. The latest poll said that 74% of Americans support NATO putting in a no-fly zone, and people don't seem to realize no-fly zone basically equals nuclear Armageddon, or at least very close to it, because
it's humanitarian nuclear Armageddon, though.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you put in a no-fly zone, then you got to be willing to shoot down Russian jets, and if you shoot down Russian jets, we're on basically nuclear watch. It's totally insane, but that's the level of ignorance that has been put forward by our media. The people responding to this poll aren't getting it out of a vacuum. They're watching our garbage media that's telling them that this makes sense, that's interviewing CIA and FBI and military generals and acting like they're unbiased contributors. And this is the alternate talking points are what's being purged. Anyone who says that it's insane to talk to military generals when you're trying to stop a war, considering all they do is war, those are the voices that are getting crushed right now. And it really is amazing to see America in such an Orwellian way use care for Ukrainian civilians, which I think most Americans who are falling for that think that they just care for human life, and they've just fallen for it. Like, I talk to my family members, some of my family, and it's like they just watch CNN and they go, "But what about the kids?" And it's like they're using that to actually continue war, to continue death. The U.S. government right now wants nothing less than for there to be peace in Ukraine. They're loving this. It's great in so many ways for sanctions on Russia, for propaganda wins. And so they're trying everything they can to make sure this continues rather than stops.
It's emotional manipulation, and I've seen it before. It's just on this scale is so interesting because I don't even think that most Americans know what Ukraine. Most Americans call it the Ukraine. Like, most Americans don't even know what Ukraine is. It's just this place that the media told in the last 2 months they should really, really, really care about. And it's frightening because you see the media's ability to manufacture consent and then to shut down opposition to it. And it's interesting too because Kevin mentioned this the other day when we had him on Breakthrough News, and it really stuck with me. The fact that while Russian media and the Russian perspective and anywhere you can go get the Russian perspective is being completely shut down, which is crazy because you want to get their perspective. Whether you agree with them or not, it's important to see what one side of this conflict is saying and what their reasoning is. And I mean, if you care about de-escalation, which I guess Americans don't, but on the flip side of that, everything Ukrainian is true. It's not propaganda. Everything that Ukrainian media puts out, everything Ukrainian officials say is automatically true and must be believed. They're the good guys. The Russians are the bad guys. End of story. Nothing in between, which is wild as well because, when it comes to Ukraine, I mean, everyone's saying like we're defending democracy and freedom against an autocratic aggressor. That clearly shows they don't know anything about Ukraine if that's what they think this is about. Before this conflict took place, what was the world hero, Volodymyr Zelensky doing? He was shutting down every single opposition outlet in Ukraine. Every single one was shut down like that. Does that sound to you like democracy and freedom? No, it sounds a lot like what we're doing now in the U.S., but it's certainly not freedom and democracy. He was increasingly autocratic,
Thanks for the sound
increasingly aligning with or appeasing the far-right elements inside of Ukraine and siding with them against Russian speakers and on and on and on. I'm not saying he's the worst person in the world, but it's just so ridiculous to me that now everything this guy, who is literally one of the best actors in Ukraine and is currently carrying out the performance of a lifetime, and he's honestly doing a brilliant job. He's a very good actor, and you can see it on display right now. He really should win like an Oscar for this. But The fact that like we're
Ronnie
being
being
told to
funny.
listen to this person and that everything coming out of the Ukrainian side is true and right. I mean, for God's sakes, I don't know if you guys saw it, but yesterday PBS aired this report. PBS, an organization, a media organization that receives funding from the American government, but is not labeled as such. PBS aired this report about Ukraine where they literally sympathetically interviewed the mayor of a Ukrainian town who behind him had a framed photograph, a framed poster of Stepan Bandera, who was a freaking Nazi. Like, he was a Ukrainian nationalist who collaborated with the Nazis, was extremely anti-Semitic, and like his ideas led to the slaughter of Jews and Polish people in Ukraine and beyond. And this guy, this mayor is a part of the Svoboda party in Ukraine, which is like an ultra nationalist, right wing, some consider it a neo-Nazi party. This guy's taking out his gun, calling Russians cockroaches. Meanwhile, he's got the background with this guy behind him blurred out. But it's obvious because Bandera is like a very distinct like hairline and a very distinct like photograph that it's hard not to, even with the background blurred. My point is like the American media has taken on the role of propagandizing for the Ukrainian side in this war. And so now that's all we're getting. With the shutdown of RT, that's by deplatforming and removing the entire Russian perspective off air, aside from tiny independent media outlets like this one, like Shadowproof, like Breakthrough, which even if our videos go viral sometimes is still like nothing compared to the amount of space that CNN and Fox News and MSNBC take
Just
up.
subscribed.
Like, it's literally just one side, I think, more than during any other war, and it's actually quite frightening.
I think this is kind of a long-term battle that has gotten to this point over information. I think that our ruling elite in America kind of didn't have control of the internet in its earlier days. It was kind of the Wild West. And then, it took a while for it to get good and fast and everything. But then you had kind of this like prime prime few years, the early 2000s through, 2014 or 15, where the information could be exchanged quickly. The social media platforms were good and operating well. And the government hadn't figured out yet, the U.S. war machine hadn't figured out yet how to crush those opposing viewpoints. And during that sweet spot, during that time, you saw so many important events pop off because of the ability to share information. Arab Spring, WikiLeaks, Occupy, Bernie Sanders movement, Black Lives Matter, they all start within that window. And then the past several years, the past 5 years, especially since Trump was elected, has just been one after another, domino after domino after domino of how to crush dissenting viewpoints. And it's ramped up until here we are today, where this invasion in Ukraine is being used as the reasoning, the final kind of shock doctrine reason to shut down many of the final remaining opposing viewpoints. Like you said, yes, there's plenty of alternative viewpoints still out there, but they have a fraction of the platform they used to. It's a tiny little space, and the filter bubble, which didn't used to exist 10 years ago, is so extreme. Like, I use the example where when I look on my Twitter, I see just like every other tweet is about freeing Julian Assange, which is wonderful. I think that's awesome. However, it's really just 1,000 people, I think, in a room yelling about Assange, and nobody outside hears much of it.
Yeah, it's curated just for you.
I've had other reporters contact me and go, "Hey, we'd like to talk. We've had a lot of trouble finding anyone who supports Julian Assange."
If you don't mind, I'd like to. Can we go through just like a case example of what Rania was talking about? It was very vivid this past week. The Ukrainians tried to get a no-fly zone off of the attack on this nuclear reactor.
Which I'm pretty sure was their fault, by the way. And the reason I say that is because... Yeah.
Well, I actually have it ready.
Well, I just want to explain, after the war in Syria, it's, after you've seen that war play out, you can spot you could spot a campaign, any war actually,
Right.
Libya, Syria, anything in the last 10 years that's played out on social media that we've watched has really like primed us to be able to easily spot like a bullshit campaign when it's happening. And the reason I think that a couple days ago, I like woke up in the middle of the night. I'm 7 hours ahead of you guys. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I was like, I couldn't fall back asleep. So I opened Twitter, which is natural, right? And I see this like nuclear power plant trending because all of these Ukrainian politicians, including the foreign minister and the president, are like, we must.
7 hours. I think she's in. I think she's in Turkey, if I remember right. At the moment, or Lebanon. I can't remember where the fuck she is anymore.
Invoke Article 5 for NATO because Russia has launched a nuclear attack that can affect all of Europe by shelling like the biggest nuclear plant in all of Europe that's in Ukraine. And I was like, what the fuck? And everybody's like, oh my God, it's on fire. And I'm like, this is too weird. Like that they're invoking, they're trying to get a NATO no-fly zone based on this.
Also, Russia, they're not idiots. Like they know where the nuclear plants are. They're not just firing missiles.
Also, they would kill their own people by doing that. Like it's just stupid. But I like immediately to me, and also it turned out like an administrative building was on fire, and then it became clear to me like it must have been. Even if it was the Russian side, it must have either been an accident or the Ukrainians did it just for this purpose because it's just too weird when then you have the Ukrainian foreign minister like trying to run a Twitter campaign about it immediately. I'm like, okay. Oh, and then Kevin's already on it. Kevin knows what's up.
This is Dmitro Kuleba, who says, Russian army is firing from all sides upon Zaporizhzhia NPP, the nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. Fire has already broken out. If it blows up, it'll be 10 times larger than Chernobyl. Russians must immediately, all caps, seize the fire, allow firefighters, establish a security zone, and he's going off. And then, meanwhile, this Canadian nuclear expert comes in, and her name is Claire Whalen. And I don't know if you saw this either.
No, I didn't know that's who she was, but I did see this tweet.
And she goes, appreciate that nuclear experts and active watchers are speaking out and echoing that the nuclear reactors at Zaporizhzhia are not likely to explode in the way that Chernobyl did. It will be bad, but a different bad. This is bad, she continues, because the plant is responsible for a lot of Ukraine's electricity. It's bad because our U.S. didn't need to attack it to knock it offline. Not amused that so Russia, Ukraine, she's using short so she can fit this into a tweet. Not amused Ukraine is misleading so many people with this. All of this is without even explaining what will happen when it goes up. Anyway, so she's admitting that it is dangerous, but there's another thing I don't know if you saw, but I was sharing it. Did you see the instruction that the State Department sent?
I saw you from embassies? You. I saw.
Yeah, I saw. I saw this. By the way, just asking questions gets you accused of like trying to
working for Putin. You're working for Putin. You hate Ukrainians. You love war.
Right.
Why do you love war, Kevin?
Yeah, but here was an amazing posting where it said that so people understand the U.S. Embassy in Kiev called the attack on the nuclear plant a war crime. And the story, by the way, for Ukraine side is that Russia shelled the power plant. The story on the side from Russia is that a Ukrainian sabotage team was actually involved, and that's why. And they attacked the
what the fuck is that even?
Building. Because the way that this is built is it's like a building, and then the nuclear reactor is inside. It's like a building within a building. And anyway, so the State Department says to everyone at their embassies, apparently sends an urgent message to all of its embassies after the Kiev embassy said it was a war crime. They go, do not retweet Embassy Kiev's tweet on shelling of the facility being a possible war crime. If you have retweeted it, unretweet it ASAP. And I know the Guardian.
Live with my mom? No, man. I live in Florida. My family is in Michigan. I do not live with. No, this is my apartment. Traveling bartender here.
says this, the Guardian said this may be an endorsement or so this may show that it's not really a war crime. But I also have another thought. What if they don't know what happened and they don't want to be dragged down the route of being caught in a lie?
Yeah.
I mean, this is classic. This is classic false flag stuff. It's honestly not that difficult to do. I saw Amnesty International tweeted out that Bellingcat had confirmed use of cluster bombs.
Oh God.
And they show a photo of a cluster bomb on the ground, and it's like, okay, first of all, you've got garbage NED from Bellingcat
tonight has been censored.
Putting this forward, but secondly, it's like, how tough would it be for those who want the war to continue,
deleted,
the Nazis,
so
etc., to put an empty shell casing on the ground and take a picture of it? Like, it's the easiest thing in the world. I don't know. It's
also like, it's also like, okay, you guys come from the side of the ideological spectrum. All these people who are flipping out about all these things. I'm like, aren't you the ones that are always talking about like bombing Iran's nuclear facilities? Yeah. Like, aren't you the ones constantly like that won't sign? Like, isn't it the U.S. that won't sign on to like cluster munitions bans? Like, isn't it the U.S. ally Israel that literally like sprinkled isn't the right word, showered southern Lebanon with like 1 million cluster bombs before leaving in 2006? Like, and the other part of all this is there's the outright moral hypocrisy of it, aside from the fact that NATO set the stage for this, U.S. set the stage for this, that literally everything they've done for the last 20 years is what led us to this point, and that they now want to erase all of that, and they're still escalating. Aside from all that, these people are the biggest hypocrites in the world. Like, it's so outrageous because they're all acting like nobody ever invaded a country before. I'm like, don't you guys do that all the time? Like, now it's just so.
Did you see the clip of? You see the clip of Condoleezza Rice?
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. She's just like, I mean, to have a war.
So my favorite thing that Lee does is fucking government secrets, and Lee doing a show with freaking Graham, 2 comedians talking about like ex-CIA things that the government has covered up, and all searchable like war crimes that we've done, and just all these things. It's a very informative but a fun way to laugh at what we already know. Yeah, so he's a smart guy. I mean, if you I always say that you only have to agree with people about 80% of the time to really enjoy their perspective. You can disagree with them. You can disagree with people without canceling them. It's a great thing to do. And then that causes discussion. 2 of my best friends, I have disagreements with them on issues, and we can get a little heated, and then you just switch topics and forget about it, right? That's one of my favorite Garfunkel and Oates episodes is Women Aren't Funny. And it's kind of funny. But I like Garfunkel and Oates, so I'd have to disagree.
Was one of the architects of what I think is the biggest crime of this century, the invasion of Iraq.
And I used to work at a comedy club, and that was always like, women are actually there are some pretty damn good ones. And the Broad City chicks are pretty fucking funny.
Sit there and talk about how this is a violation of international law. I'm like, since when do any of you, excuse me?
This is what Condoleezza does to people.
This is what she does to people. Since when do any of you care about international law? And beyond that, it's just like, you guys are still bombing countries. Like, it's not like this happened 20 years ago and stopped. Like, you're starving so many people around the world. They're openly saying right now that they want to basically like destroy Russia's economy and make everyone suffer. They're openly saying that, like, collective punishment, openly. And to me, it's just like, the other thing here is how the Russophobia like awakened in everyone, just to see people being so like, let's fire every Russian everywhere in the world. Let's isolate every Russian everywhere in the world.
Which is also hilarious because you know how many people
literally in you got to poke fun at everything, right? And there's a lot of people that'll push that issue. It's pretty fun. You got to push every issue, and if you're not willing to push an issue, you're not willing to be funny.
Inside Ukraine consider themselves Russian and not
Yeah.
Ukrainian. But
Right.
we're like, oh, kill all the Russians, and like
All right,
half
so I
the
never
people
try
in
to do all
Ukraine are
of
like,
that.
we're
This is
the
a good
Russians.
conversation, though.
But
We're
like also this
well-
idea that
well
Russians
past the
everywhere have to like
60%
condemn
mark where we
this
should usually
invasion.
try to
Could you
cut out,
imagine
hey.
if like Americans,
I
if
wanted to
people
do this
demanded
clip.
that like
This is- I've never
Americans
seen this
everywhere
before.
like
This shit was
condemn American
hilarious.
imperialism to like keep their jobs? Like
All
that
right.
never happens.
Let's lighten things up. Of course, fuck commercial.
Sugar.
So this was off Jimmy Dore. It was a Wheel of Fortune episode. I don't know. Recently, lately, I was like half asleep, half stoned on watching on Jimmy Dore on the TV and on the couch. So I don't know exactly if this was an old or new clip, but it was pretty fucking funny. And of course, Jimmy's take is another comedian. So a less serious note. Sticking with the comedian though. No, thank you, you stupid.
Minutes I've ever seen on Wheel of Fortune. So now you can see what it is. It says another feather, blank N, Y, to, and then
In your cap, is that what you're saying?
that's what it is. Another feather in your cap.
God,
Okay.
Kurt should do that show.
Kurt, you'd be a winner.
Absolutely.
Here we go. Ready? Watch this.
Assault,
Okay.
another feather in your hat.
Oh, wow.
Another feather in your hat. And whenever you mess up that hard, Pat Zajac doesn't even try to comfort you. He just moves on. Watch this. Watch.
Assault,
Okay.
another feather in your hat.
Christopher.
He just moves on. Christopher. He just moves on. He doesn't even go, oh, too bad. It's right there in your face. He just moves on. Now watch what happens to this guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen him.
Censored. G. No G.
He asked for a G.
What the hell's going on?
Now this guy gets totally screwed. Watch this.
Uh-oh.
He doesn't even get a chance to solve it.
Have another shot at it.
They bankrupted him.
Solve the puzzle.
So now this woman gets another chance.
Another feather in your lap.
She says lap.
No!
Oh my
Feather in your
lap.
lap. I did not see that coming at all.
A feather in your lap.
I didn't even know what you could pick besides cap at that point.
She said hat. Then they
Okay,
said
it's not hat. Is there anything else? I think I got it.
the other guy asked for a G. Here we go. Watch this. Now it goes to this guy again.
900. D.
This is nuts.
No.
It's
What?
such a
He asked
basic
for a
ass
B
shit.
or a D.
B?
I couldn't see the one.
Good God, dude, it's so
Dapper?
easy.
And then he goes,
This
Is
is
it
nuts.
dad?
It's so easy.
and Zajac just goes, no. And then he moves
It's so
on to
easy.
no.
It's so
you
easy.
like he's
It's
not being
freaking
nice
ridiculous.
or comforting. He's just no. All right.
Just no.
Want to hear it again here?
900. D.
No. He asked for a D. Now watch, it goes back to this guy, and he gets screwed again. Again, he gets screwed.
What is happening?
That guy didn't get a chance to guess yet.
This is rigged.
He didn't get a chance to. He went bankrupt,
This is
lose a turn.
painful.
Oh my God!
In the wheel, you can try to solve the puzzle. What do you want to do? Go ahead and spin if you don't know.
I'm
it.
gonna go ahead and spin.
She has to spin. She still doesn't know it.
Jesus.
Well, what letter would you like?
A P.
A P.
There's P.
Oh my God.
She says
Spin
pat.
or solve.
I will solve.
Okay.
Another feather in your map.
Map. She said map. No. She said map.
This is so freaking
No.
bad.
Oh my goodness.
Now this guy goes bankrupt. Now it's got to go to someone else.
I'll spin.
Go to bankrupt.
So this guy finally gets
Come
a chance.
On, come on.
He finally gets a chance. He's gonna get.
What would you like? A C. There's a C up there anywhere.
Jesus. Of
You want
course,
to solve
yes.
this? I'll solve. Another feather in your cap. Yeah, there you go. I thought he was going to say
He's the only one that knows that phrase. It's a pretty popular phrase. I guess I bartend for old people. I hear every fucking phrase ever, and it just, oh my god. But like you hear, yeah, like I thought, yeah, just like the
Jesus
whole
Map.
Christ.
She said map.
map.
Hat.
Feather in your
lap,
map.
map. Feather in your map.
Wow,
And there's a list of the letters that haven't been used that they can see. So she didn't like go see cap. No, she went map. Map makes more sense than cap. They know the letters that they haven't asked yet, and it's up on a list.
Wow. This isn't exactly a feather in her map. A feather in your lap, she said.
Yeah, that was so bad, and all of them didn't know it except for the one person who kept getting bankrupt, and like his whole brain was probably yeah, no, he definitely, yeah, that was pretty funny too. He definitely spit on Alex Jones. He literally did a spit take. He went up, he took the drink, and then spit it on him. Yeah, I saw that happen in real time. That was pretty fucking funny. All right, going back to something serious for enough.
Welcome to the Mark Steiner Show here on The Real News. I'm Mark Steiner, and as usual, it's great to have you all with us. The war in Ukraine is a complex matter. The reasons behind it, the politics of the moment,
Pretty fucking funny though.
or what I like to call a dialectical dance of different factors. And we'll be hearing those voices who decry the war, oppose the Russian invasion, are aware
Like
of
the
Russian
Jimmy spitting on
interference,
Alex
and
was
offer
funny
an
because
independent and nuanced analysis.
Jimmy was looking for a
One of
reaction, and
those
so
who
was
knows how to
Alex
cut
by
through the
trying to
simplistic
jump
lies
into
and jargon.
TYT's show. So they were
The
both
passion
looking
of
for
someone who's
reaction.
experienced war
Don't know this, Iffy.
and an
It's,
analysis of
real
one who has written
news.
hundreds,
They
if
have a
not thousands
handful of
articles,
independent journalists,
as well as numerous books. It's Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Chris Hedges, who I've interviewed numerous times before. He was foreign correspondent for
the Real
15
News
years for the New
Network
York
does
Times.
a lot of
He
independent
served as our Middle East bureau
journalism,
chief, Balkan bureau chief of the same paper.
anti-war, anti-cop.
He worked for the Dallas Morning
holding
News,
cops
Christian Science
accountable,
Monitor,
holding
NPR,
politicians accountable,
and he's written numerous
small
books,
town news.
and I've read them all. American Fascists, The Christian Right and the War on America, Empire of Illusion, The End of Literacy and the Triumph of the Spectacle. War is a force that gives us meaning. America, a Farewell Tour, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt. And Chris Hedges, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Mark.
So where to begin this? I mean, there's so much here. Let me just start with you for a moment. I think one of the things that struck me about this piece that you wrote, and it's been reflected in other things I've seen you write over the years and speak about over the years, is the passion and analysis you bring to this because of someone who has experienced the horrendous aspects of war, who's been in the middle of it. So let's start there, because that really is where you start this. I mean, you really start off from the kind of passion of human beings who have not seen this. You do not understand what it's like to be stuck in a war, what war means, what it costs.
Yes, and it's very facile and easy to, if you're supporting Russia, defend war as an instrument of political pressure. It's not, of course, it's not politics by other means. It is about the destruction of all systems that nurture and protect life, environmental, social, cultural, political, familial, religious.
I know that anxiety.
It is demonic, especially when you are using the kind of industrial weapons that define war in the 20th century. So I wrote a piece called Chronicle of a War Foretold. I was in Eastern Europe in 1989 covering the revolutions that led to the breakup of the Soviet Union. And there was universal understanding that the expansion of NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany would be an unnecessary provocation of Russia. And there was a promise made by the Reagan administration, the British government, the French, and the German governments not to do this. Well, of course, they broke that promise.
Tom Collins is Gin Vodka, or Jesus, Gin or Vodka nowadays, and Lime Simple. Lime Simple. I could do way more than that, dude. Yeah, I've been bartending for a while. Pretty good one.
NATO troops
This
in Eastern
is
Europe, and let's
whiskey,
just roll
'cause
off
that's
the
how
list that are
bartender
countries that are
finishes
now
the day.
NATO
We
countries.
don't fucking
like
drink
Poland,
drinks.
Hungary, the
We
Czech
drink whiskey or
Republic,
vodka straight.
Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania,
That's how you know I'm a
Romania,
bartender.
Slovakia, Slovenia, Albania, Croatia, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. Now, the fact is, NATO, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, should have been rendered obsolete. And there was all this talk about the peace dividend. I don't know if you remember, and we wouldn't have to plow.
Here's how I'm a Boulevardier drinker, Negroni based drink, but with bourbon instead of vodka or instead of gin. And I'm not a big gin drinker, so Tom Collins traditional would be gin. I'm not a big fan of gin. Most people do it with vodka nowadays. Luckily, the Collins has been moved to a vodka drink by a lot of people, and it's a little smoother that way. But people are bastardizing everything nowadays, so Tom Collins can be whatever you want to be. It's not as changeable as some drinks now, but things get bastardized quite a bit since the 2000 martini craze. But cheers for joining us for a little while. And yeah, YouTube, we're still going strong. Cool. Not gonna do all this, but wanted to check in. Haven't checked in with Chris Hedges in a while, and the Real News Network, they're not afraid to ask questions, so it's always a good conversation.
The resources and money into weapons and the military that we did during the Cold War.
Fucked everything up.
But of course, what happened was that
Cosmo's not a martini.
The arms manufacturers
sour.
Saw a multi-billion-dollar bonanza by refitting communist bloc countries to make them militarily compatible with NATO. So, and that's of course what happened. I was in Warsaw not long ago. There are billboards from Raytheon all over the city because, of course, they're bilking all sorts of money from the Poles. And a lot of this is done through
for bartenders is that people still
loans.
Like they still think that
but
way.
all
It's
of
crazy.
if you looked at the stock prices since the conflict in the Ukraine, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, etc.,
like, oh my God,
they've
like
quadrupled,
something
or they've
fruity
certainly
and
increased
pretty.
quite
It's
a
like,
bit,
no,
just as they
like,
did at the
it's
inception
alcohol.
of the wars
Let
in
it
the
be
Middle East.
alcohol.
That's how they
Enjoy
make
the
their
alcohol
money.
part of the
So the
alcohol.
perpetuation or the expansion of NATO
okay. You're
beyond
allowed
the
to like
borders was
whiskey. You're
done
allowed
to
to like
feed
vodka.
these companies. It never made geopolitical
If you like
sense.
gin, that's cool. I like
Everyone,
two.
from Henry
Not many.
Kissinger, not a man I
Not
particularly
many.
admire, to George Kennan, to others, were quite frank about this. And now they're constructing in Poland a NATO missile base that's 100 miles from the Russian border. We almost had a nuclear showdown, or we had a nuclear showdown, almost went to nuclear war with the Soviets over the establishment of missile bases in Cuba, which was 90 miles off the coast of Florida. So the Russians were clearly baited. They have every right to feel betrayed and threatened. And remember that the Soviet Union was devastated with the German invasion, the Nazi invasion in World War II, and the century before, devastated by the Napoleonic invasion. My father was a cryptographer at the Tehran conference and coded all of Roosevelt's correspondence. And that conference was in many ways about establishing the buffer zone that Stalin wanted so that the Soviet Union would feel protected. Now, all of that said, preemptive war, which is, of course, what we did in Iraq and what the Russians have now done in the Ukraine, is, under post-Nuremberg laws, a criminal war of aggression. It's a war crime.
Oh, they're not responding to you.
I don't think the invasion of Ukraine would have happened if the promises that were originally made to Russia, to Gorbachev in particular,
I'm not
gonna
lie and say that I don't
but then
have
to understand is not to
bug-out
condone.
bag possibly
The
ready.
invasion
And
of Ukraine
I don't
is
know.
a crime.
I'm a
I do
traveling
want to come back
bartender,
to
so
how you began this
half the
article
year
a little
I'm
bit
in
later
a
before
very
we
much a
leave each other
populated
today.
area. The other
But
half
I
of the
want
year
to pick
I'm
up
very
something you
rural
just said
area.
about
So
Russia and
year
the
I'd be
invasion
safe.
of Ukraine itself.
This part of the year,
and because I have
very
wrestled with this
fucked.
question you just raised, and I'm
But
raising
yeah, I
it with
still have a
numbers of
bug out
people.
bag. I have some
The
dehydrated
provocation by the
veggies
West and
and
NATO is very
some
real.
essentials
And
in
I want to come back to that
backpacking
because I think that's
backpack to ready
needs
to
to be
run.
understood by people how that is a
I
huge
got a big
factor in what
puppy
we're
here. I
seeing
gotta
here
take care of
at
those,
this
so that would
moment.
always add some weight.
Russia has a long history
Yeah, I don't want
of
nuclear war, but
invading countries around it
even a
for
dirty
its
bomb,
own imperial
just a
reasons.
small nuke somewhere.
You know, with Chechnya, taking of Crimea, and these have been happening for over 100 years. They've been involved in these wars, including Afghanistan. But when it comes to Ukraine, they seized Crimea. They've helped seize in every way except the way of incorporating into Russia parts of the Ukraine. So why do you maintain that this would not have happened had NATO not encroached so closely on Russian territory?
Because Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and in the early years of Putin, Russia wanted to build relationships and security alliances and economic
can't even process anything else.
Agreements with Europe. That was the goal, and that was something that was rebuffed because in order to justify these massive arms expenditures, you had to create an enemy, and if Russia wasn't willing to be an enemy, Russia would be turned into one. Again, that's speculative, but certainly Gorbachev was quite upfront about building mutual alliances, including security alliances between Russia, Europe, and the United States. But Gorbachev got nothing, Yeltsin got nothing, and Putin got nothing. In fact, what they got was aggression. Of course, it's speculation, and then we can go back to the old Soviet Union invading Hungary after World War II and Czechoslovakia and all that. All of that is true. But I do think that there was a genuine desire in the early years after the Cold War on the part of Russia to be integrated into Europe, and that was never done.
So, and coming back to Ukraine for a moment, just in terms of that relationship, the relationship between Ukraine and Russia is an ancient one in a sense, ancient in terms of the 1600s when actually where it all began. The beginning of the whole Russian Empire actually began in the Ukraine under the first Vladimir there. So the interaction between these two pieces, these two bodies, these two nations has been going on for a long time. So, and Russia has always maintained that it has certain sovereignty over Ukraine, even during the years when Ukraine was represented in the United Nations by its own ambassador, not the Soviet ambassador, as Ukraine SSR. We all knew that it was really part of the Soviet Union. So talk for a bit about that relationship and how you think that also feeds into what we're seeing now. And the complexity of what I've talked to some people on the ground there that we hope to have on with us next week. And they also paint a picture in Ukraine right now of the resistance being everybody from the left to the right fighting the Russians. So I'm curious how all that fits into your analysis of what's going on.
Well, there's no question that the Soviet Union, like the United States, indulged in all the sins of empire. There's been very fraught relationships between the Soviet Union and before that the Tsarist Russia and Eastern Europe. I mean, there were moments in the history, of course, when the country of Poland didn't even exist because of Moscow. So yes, there always have been tensions, but there were also tensions within Europe, which of course led to the most egregious example is World War I and World War II, but there were all sorts of conflicts before. So yes, historically there have been tensions and there have been conflicts. Europe largely managed to move beyond that after World War II. And again, I will go back to the reconfiguration of Russia after the Cold War that it's my reading of the first three leaders, again, in the early years of Putin, that they wanted integration. They didn't want confrontation.
Yeah, I think he's got that.
But
Chris
yes,
probably
of
has
course,
more books
the history
written.
itself is very bloody.
He's
That's
written
also
a lot
true,
of
though, in the
books.
middle of Europe.
I'm going to
But,
also talk a bit more about
I love that fucking
the
room.
role
man. That
of the
fucking
war
room's
profiteers
awesome.
in all of this,
Just
because that really does get
massive.
lost in many discussions,
What
especially in
the
the mainstream
hell?
media. Just before
Does
you
he
came
live
on,
in a
I
hobby
started
room?
reading the lyrics
What the
of
fuck
"Masters
is
of
that?
War" by Bob Dylan, and how it fit into this description of the world that we're facing at the moment. And you list a number of things in this article,
Did he
and
paint
companies
this?
that are
Did he paint that?
making profits off
I
what's
want to
happening
know
at
those
this
two
very
things.
moment.
Does he
Will make
live in a
huge
hobby
profits if
room?
it
And did he
continues.
paint that?
So that's a factor we don't often put into, at least in the establishment world. They don't put that into the analysis of why we're in the situation we're in.
That's my question
yeah,
right
this
now.
is yesterday. All four General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon hit their 52-week highs.
Fuck you. Jesus.
Because, of course, fueling a conflict in the Ukraine, expanding NATO, this is good for business. Doesn't make any geopolitical sense, but it's good for business. The European Union has now allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to purchase weapons for the Ukraine.
Of course they have.
Germany has said it will almost triple its defense budget for 2022. Biden has asked Congress for $6.4 billion to fund the Ukraine, and that's to supplement the $650 million in military aid to the Ukraine over the past year. So
Gotta go back to
the permanent war economy was largely responsible for extending the debacles in the Middle East, in particular in Afghanistan. We know from the Afghan papers that all the policymakers realized that it was a quagmire, that they would not.
52-week stock highs was Raytheon. It's Raytheon, Halliburton, Boeing, and General Dynamics. The four big. It's the four biggest war companies. The four biggest merchants. They all hit their 52-week highs with the possibility of war. Northrop, yeah, they're like that's like seventh biggest defense contractor, I think. Yeah, they're like seventh, I want to say. But the top four all hit theirs, so that's pretty big. Then GE is also like I think fifth, and you don't even think of GE as being a the seventh largest defense contractor is what I'm saying. I think Northrop has the seventh largest for the U.S. defense contracting. I had that list, the top 10. I used to have it memorized pretty well.
Achieve control, but again, the profit motive was a dominant factor, I believe, and in the same way, the profit motive was the dominant factor in the expansion of NATO, and those masters of war, as Dylan calls them, really control the political system. So while there was universal agreement that NATO should not be expanded, that Russia should not be provoked, the primacy of profit took control. And this is really, I believe, why we are where we are, which does not, as I want to say again, excuse the crime that Russia has committed.
So talk about what you...
I always say, and I'm not... I mean, Russia and the U.S. want to have proxy wars forever because they both profit from weapons. It's just basic economics. The governments themselves are both built upon oil and weapons. So both governments are going to push proxy wars. They don't want to have an actual escalation, which is why Biden has been backing off. They call him weak. It's coordinated. It's probably coordinated. Anyhow, they don't want to have a nuclear war. They want to have nice mid-level proxy wars. That's the best way for profit. They're just getting more bold. Right. Yeah, I know. I mean, it's an interesting abstraction. It's very interesting that the smart companies learn that taking money from the general public is the slow man's game. Taking money from the government is the quick man's game. And so that's why we're trying to privatize everything, because you want the money from the government. You want money coming from the government constantly. You're privatizing schools, but still giving schools a choice, so you can take the tax money. But yeah, it's all got to abstract the tax money. It's the best. Government can print more money than anybody else. Billionaires can't print as much money as the government can print. Unlimited just printing. So got to extract from the government. It's the best way to get the money. I'm gonna give this. I've seen this before. I looked this up. I threw it on my list here on the other computer while we were watching here. So I have the notebook next to me. I want to check this out. I think I've seen him before. Kyle Dunnigan. Those of you on YouTube, you can see the chat at least right there. So I know you can't see the full chat, but yeah, I want to give this a shot. I'm pretty sure I've seen clips and bits. It looks very familiar.
From the President of the United States. My fellow Jamaicans, our nation is in crisis. The Decepticon variant Hobo 19 is still killing fat people. Inflation is destroying our fire jars, and now that Ukraine is being sexually raped. That is why I've asked Congress to order a full-scale attack on Joe Rogan. Not Joe Rogan, the Russian guy, the guy with the shirt, Pootie Tang, man, that dude. We gotta come together, man. Get this guy. He's got our cranes. He's got all our cranes. We need him for the better build back. The build back better. The better build back better plan, man. You say it 3 times fast, pal. You say it.
I've actually seen this one too, and I'm still, oh my god, that's fucking hilarious. Again, yeah, I have seen this, and that is fucking hilarious. I love the Pootie Tang. And Pootie Tang is one of my favorite comedies, so that is fucking hilarious. Putin only. Yeah, I'll give another one for him. That was only 50 seconds. Shit, why do you go back? Oh, motherfucker. No, I paused on the...
What you think when you...
Alright. So yeah. Sorry, that was on a different thing, so I got a complete look over. Let us check in with the one, do this while I'm going to try to do 2 things at once. Let's do that. Alright. This Russian police beat and arrest anti-war protesters. This is a British publication.
Я не мешаю вам. Нет. Девушка, отойдите, вы мешаете работе сотрудников полиции. Как я вам мешаю? Мешаете. Мужчина. За что задержали? Оставьте его. Где мне его искать?
Отойдите, отойдите.
Okay. The point I wanted to show that was because the Sun, a British publication, I believe, was making it seem like a big deal that the Russian police are just beating up protesters. It's like, yeah, so do American anti-war protesters, so do British anti-war protesters, so do French cop beating up protesters. It's just a standard thing. It's how we do this now. That's nothing new. And my mind's not getting boggled by this. This is not anything unexpected.
New piece in The Atlantic with Dan Schwerin. It's called A State of Emergency for Democracy. In it, she argues that Putin's war on Ukraine is, quote, part of a long-running shadow war to destabilize free societies and discredit democratic institutions around the world. She argues, quote, we need a strong democracy in the United States to win the global argument with autocracy. Joining us now live is former Secretary of State, First Lady, Senator, presidential nominee Hillary Rodham Clinton. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for making time to be here. I really appreciate you accepting our invitation.
Happy to talk with you tonight.
First, let me just ask you if you think we're asking the right questions here. When you look at this war, when you look at these past 5 days, what do you think is the most important thing for the American people to understand?
Most cops are bad.
I think all of your questions are really important, but I would put a big umbrella over them, Rachel, for the American people, really for citizens of all democracies, that this may at first be somewhat confusing for those who are looking at it from the outside, but make no mistake, this is not just an unprovoked, aggressive invasion by Russia. It is an effort by Putin and those who prop him up and enable him to really wage war on the rule of law and democracy, on freedom. And it's critically important that, as we've seen in the last days, that democratic governments and people rally to support Ukraine in this struggle, because it's also our struggle.
In terms of the Western response, I will not be the first observer to note that the speed and unanimity of the Western world's response has been a surprise. The idea that the Russian sanctions at this point would be multilateral, that even banking sanctions would involve countries like Singapore and Switzerland, of all places, that the Russian central bank would be sanctioned, that countries like Germany, which for very good historical reasons don't send weapons abroad, would be sending weapons directly into Ukraine to help them. The European Union would be sending in weapons. I think it is a remarkable.
We have sent $1 billion in weapons to Ukraine over the last year. And we said that like nothing. We sent that so fast it didn't even matter. Alright, I got that lined up. That next clip after this. Fast forward. It's interview Sunday. I'm trying to catch all the interviews, right? But this is, oh man. This is a little over a week ago. Just a touch over a week ago. And I'm not sad that I missed it. Anyhow, I had one longer big clip to do, but I'm going to breeze through this for a few minutes, and then we'll check out that OnlyFans for Putin. He's a funny guy. I'm going to have to throw subscribe on the next clip here, but a little more self-torture,
single purpose by the Western world to help. It also feels like, while it simultaneously feels like more than we can imagine, it also feels like not enough. How do you view the Western response thus far?
Well, I agree with you that it is remarkable. I give President Biden and the Biden administration a lot of credit for leading the world to this point. The strategy of disclosing intelligence to demonstrate very clearly that Putin was trying to do once again what he had done before, use disinformation, false flag operations in order to try to justify an unjustifiable invasion was incredibly smart, unprecedented, and it seems to have really woken up so much of the world and stymied Putin. And bringing not just Europe, but as you say, countries as far-flung as Singapore, even Japan and others, to understand.
Hold on a second. Is she fucking reading this? Where the hell is she looking? I mean, so my camera's up here. I gotta look down here to watch this. I'm not reading anything. I have another screen over here because this is where I read my chats. I can't watch the screen and chat at the same time, so I come over here, chat, come back. That's all I can handle. Very poor, I'm in an apartment here. She's in a fucking studio, right? Like she's actually reading this, and I hate her so much.
Understand that this threat was global. It certainly is a direct threat to Western democracies right in the heart of Europe. But to let an autocrat do what Putin decided to do is something that everybody has a stake in trying to stop. So up until now, the kind of economic pressures that have been brought to bear, I think are not only remarkable, but seem to be really biting. And the second point you make, providing necessary weapons.
if the Clintons want to remain their power, they need to start bringing up the daughter because she just needs to disappear. And Bill is obviously looking freaking insane nowadays that his Epstein ties are. I shouldn't have said that name out so freaking. Should not have said that name. But, yeah, let's watch all my viewers disappear over here. Alright, anyway, Jeff connections. And that family should just disappear because they have Jeff connections. So, but because I'm also streaming on YouTube, and if you say that last name, you can get taken down pretty quickly. And my stream is small. Yeah, it's like Well, for YouTube, it's like that. Yes, it's absolutely Voldemort for YouTube. And if I say that name a few times, I've seen my stream get taken. My internet. I've seen my internet stop on YouTube, so I don't say that name, but we can say Jeff.
Ukraine has begun. It needs to be accelerated. The Ukrainians need Stinger missiles to shoot down Russian aircraft. They need Javelin missiles to stop tanks.
We've given them $1 million in weapons, and they're like, we haven't given them enough Stingers yet. Like, Stingers we're just giving random ass people Stingers sometimes. It's a little scary what the so-called left is willing to give when it comes to weapons.
They need a lot of ammunition. They need as much support as they possibly can be given. Because it is a two-pronged approach now. The President, Zelensky, who has been extraordinary and deserves the thanks and gratitude, appreciation, admiration of all of us,
that guy
is trying to operate on two levels. He's trying to continue to rally his people to fight the Russian invaders, but he's also saying, look, I'll talk to you. I don't know what can come of it, because that is a possible way out. If the Ukrainians, with our help, can impose enough economic pain on Putin.
I wonder if she had yeah, I know. We're gonna be done with this super fast. I wonder if she had 15 people write this or a dozen people. That's my estimate. 12 to 15 people write this for her. She's obviously reading it. She has no actual. She's just dictating. What the fuck are we doing with her?
And sadly, the Russians.
Okay, this is supposed to be an interview. She's just dictating. That's not an interview. So, all right. So let's move on. I'm gonna check this one out. You say this one's good. We'll do this. Those of you guys can read the comments up there so you can see it. So we're gonna go back to Kyle. Done again.
Okay, getting close to goal for 400 parachute. Old parachute, no good. Soldier drop like rock. Okay, we hit the goal. Now is sexy time. Get ready, it's going to be getting hot in here. If we hit next goal, I will show mood up. That was good sexy time. Very good sexy time. Okay, we hit next goal of helicopter. I will show Mudak. What is Mudak? Mudak is my asshole.
I like the Biden one better.
I shoot my show alone and
Fucking Biden one is fucking hilarious. That's pretty good too. That's pretty funny too. That was pretty funny. The Biden one, just the Biden's fucking easy target, I know, but they all are, right? I mean, you literally look at them as people, it's like they're fucking ridiculous. They know ridiculous. What the
NATO
hell
should not be.
What did I just click on? That's not what I want for the last episode.
Austin Gonzalez, who's a member of the National Political Committee of the Democratic Socialists of America, joining us here on the Freedom Side. Austin, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I am very happy to have you. And, DSA, you all have come out, you put out a statement regarding the war. The White House was attacking you. And I want to get into some of that, but I don't.
One more with Rania there for the big fans on YouTube. Pretty funny. Same name, Stony Progressive. Stony Progressive. Everywhere for me there. On YouTube and Twitch, and then it's just a little newer on the Twitch. I just started a couple weeks ago on Twitch, where been doing this for the live streaming for beginning of the year, doing videos on YouTube for a couple of years, but yeah.
To be guilty of many of your critics, which was to caricature your statement. So before we get into it, what did DSA put out? What have you been saying about this conflict?
Absolutely. Thank you, Eugene. There's so many things to unpack here. I'd have to say during my entire time in leadership within DSA, this is the first time the White House has attacked us directly, which to me is a disturbing sign of how jingoistic things have become, right? And unpacking the statement that we released itself, right? Our statement condemned the Russian invasion, right? In very strong terms, right? What seems to have bothered people is our rhetoric referencing NATO expansionism, right? Which to me is an impossible part of this entire scenario to ignore, right? It's been shocking to me, honestly, to see how many people I've seen outright defend NATO, right? Talk about how, well, no, NATO's role in this is important in protecting people. I'm just like, excuse me? We're in a very, I don't want to get too hyperbolic here, right? But I feel like we're in a very dark place when we're seeing leftists or whatever we want to call it defending NATO, right? I thought anti-NATO was a very run-of-the-mill position for any sort of socialist, right? For any sort of anti-imperialist, right? And something I like to say is you can't call yourself a socialist if you're not an anti-imperialist, right? And if you're going to be an anti-imperialist, that means opposing NATO. So I was very proud to see my organization, Democratic Socialists of America, forcefully reject both NATO, reject the invasion from Russia, right? I think it's very important to talk about these situations with context, right? And not to look at these sorts of situations so binary, right? So black and white. Right, like it's amazing how many people I see that are like embracing these weird like World War II like Sudetenland fantasies. I'm just like, do you guys know what's actually happening here? Right? Have you been following this situation at all before the last 3 months? But yes, it was remarkable to me to see even the White House coming out and attacking DSA. But once again, as a member of a socialist organization, I lean on the great socialist Eugene Debs himself, who very proudly stood up against World War I, which I think is important for any socialist to do.
Well, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, on top of the White House rapid response guy attacking DSA, there's also been a couple think pieces from various outlets. I know recently today it was all on Twitter, New York Magazine. Someone from New York Magazine came after DSA, which was interesting because I don't think anybody was quoted from DSA, just the critics were quoted, which included, I think the New York Post was one of the outlets that came after you and attacked you. But it does seem like, we're always told the left is so irrelevant in the U.S. They don't even matter. DSA is so dumb, it doesn't even matter. It has no power. So I think it also speaks to some level of power or fear of power that the left does or can have in the U.S. that someone from the White House felt the need to attack DSA, that so many different outlets feel the need to try to police the left's position on this issue. And, I'm the biggest pessimist in the world. So when I see a glass half full, it means something. But I'm curious your thoughts on that. Do you think this speaks to some level of perhaps, power that the left has, maybe more than it thinks it has, if a DSA statement can cause this much controversy?
Okay. I 100% agree with those sentiments, Rania. And I've even told a lot of my fellow DSA members, right? To me, it's exactly what you just said there. This is a sign of our power, right? And not just DSA, the movement, right? This is a sign of the power of the movement, the importance of what you guys do, right here with Breakthrough News, right? I feel like during my entire time as a leftist, as an anti-imperialist, I've seen a real blossoming of the movement within the last 5 to 10 years, right? And the liberal media, whatever we want to call it, is taking notice. Literally, the White House is taking notice. To me, that is absolutely a sign of our power, right? And to me, I look at that as not, to me, that's why I say, getting attacked, that isn't the time to now hide from our anti-NATO position. No, that's when we double down on it, right? That's when we tell people why we're anti-NATO, right? Which is in the DSA national platform, I should say, right? U.S. withdrawal from NATO, that is, right? This is an important time to educate people on NATO, right? When people are actually paying attention to what's happening here, right? And because we have this power, this platform, because people are attacking us, it's because of...
Yeah, I don't really know I've never actually looked into or know anybody from the Democratic Socialists. I know Jimmy talks about them once in a while, and so does Jackson. I think once in a while. Yeah. Anyhow, but the big thing here was that they're trying to explain their anti-NATO position, which I mean, wasn't NATO supposed to be disassembled in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed? But so yeah, they're trying to explain their position, which I thought was interesting for a second here. Yeah.
That platform, right? Because people know, oh, there's an actual movement here raising awareness on NATO, right? Referencing NATO's crimes in Libya, right? We saw what happened 10 years ago, right? You're trying to tell me that NATO intervention is going to help the Ukraine? Are you serious? Like, this is why I say, like, it's amazing to me how many people, and I try not to get too cynical, right? You refer to yourself as a pessimist there, Ronnie, right? Try not to get too cynical, but the amount of people I've seen in the last 3 months have very strong opinions about NATO and everything that I haven't seen them ever express before is very curious to me. But once again, getting to the central point here, once again, I think this is absolutely a sign of our power, but not just DSA. Like I say, the whole greater socialist, anti-imperialist movement, whatever we want to call it. I think it's so critically important for us to be coming together right now because I expect the attacks to just increase. They're not going away anytime soon. These attacks are going to escalate, right? And it's going to be critically important to be being there for each other, to be amplifying each other's messages and making sure that people are not being singled out as pro-Putin, whatever that means. It's once again, the word shocking comes to mind, that any sort of criticism of NATO is interpreted as, oh, so you're pro-Russian fascism, whatever that even means, right? This has literally nothing to do with Putin. This is about recognizing that NATO expansionism brought us to this point unequivocally. Even the DSA International Committee put out a couple of tweets earlier today referencing how this position that NATO expansionism was going to provoke a response from Russia is something that was maintained by some of the most hard-right intelligence analysts during the 90s. This is nothing shocking or new or radical. It's a basic fact. But yeah, that's some people struggle to accept that, it seems.
You got that right. That's for sure. And we still have Walter Smolarek with us from the Answer Coalition. But I certainly comment on whatever you like, Walter. But I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on a similar point that it's possible to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can have a sophisticated analysis that touches on a number of things, but it's also possible to build real opposition in this moment to escalation. We don't just have to despair.
Yeah, I think that's completely true. That's completely true. And it's more important than ever because this is such an unbelievably dangerous situation. I mean, this involves the two main nuclear armed powers in the world. I mean, even though it's a difficult moment right now for the anti-war movement, it's also a crucially important one. And I completely agree with the points that Austin was making. I mean, the idea that somebody could consider themselves progressive or even a socialist and think anything positive about NATO whatsoever, just it's shocking, right? I mean, NATO was a military alliance that was conceived, founded in order to annihilate socialism militarily. I mean, that's what NATO was all about. It was so that when World War III comes around, I mean, this was the founders of NATO's thinking. When World War III rolls around, all of us major capitalist world powers need to be on the same team to destroy the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons. And it maintained that offensive character all throughout its existence, including after the fall of the Soviet Union. I mean, of course, it's a big part of this great power competition strategy that the Pentagon has, which says that China and Russia are like the #1 targets on our hit list, and it's also been used to inflict horrific suffering on the peoples of the former Yugoslavia, of Afghanistan, and most recently Libya. And I think that's another important point that Austin raised. I mean, if anybody thinks that NATO intervention could possibly have a positive or progressive outcome for a targeted society, look at what happened in Libya. That was sold to the public in a lot of similar ways, right? Like there's a besieged people, there's this horrible dictator Gaddafi, and he's going to massacre his own people. And we, the West, NATO, have a responsibility to protect. And what was the consequences? I mean, there was a horrific war, and the fabric of Libyan society was so shredded that, I mean, even the slave trade reemerged in Libya. I mean, it was an unmitigated disaster for the people there. And that's been the case anywhere the United States or NATO or any of its junior imperialist partners have intervened. Nothing that they do will lessen the suffering of the people of Ukraine or bring desperately needed peace to the people of Ukraine. Actually, the only thing that the United States could possibly do to improve the situation is make an ironclad pledge that NATO will not expand anymore, or better yet, abolish NATO altogether. I mean, that's the only contribution to peace that the United States could possibly make at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to ask you both a question. Walter, I'll start with you since I have you here. I think the rumor is...
Let's see how we go here. You're going to give me an ad? Of course you're going to give me an ad.
Hurricane season.
Hurricane season. Shut your mouth. All right. That's hilarious, though. So this is Ron Pacone. He is interviewing Dr. Fahidel Kabab. They're talking about climate change, climate reparations, and monetary MMT. And Ron does a lot of MMT clips. I like talking about MMT. So I'm going to gladly bring this about, and we'll watch this for a little bit. I am smoking my next bowl of the night, trying to get ready for the sleepy time myself. Thanking DJ for hanging out tonight. DJ Dad Jeans. I didn't even look at the name. Gotta really, eyesight's going to shit.
However, use our individual power to make changes and to support
All right.
So checking out Rob Pacone again. He does Get Your News On with Ron. He does a weekly interview, and we check him out at least every other week, right? I mean, he's got some good interviews. I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago when he had Jill Stein on, but and fucking YouTube. Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns, mainly caused by human activities, especially the burning of fossil fuels. Thank you for your fucking context.
That moment of truth, where I wait for it to go live. Are we live on YouTube? Are we live on Rockfin? Are we live? Twitter's always first. Twitter is always just like, boom, we're here. But then Rockfin's a little slower. Oh, Rockfin's alive. Rockfin came in second. Oh, YouTube came in third. All right. Today it was Rockfin coming in second, YouTube coming in third. It's always the race for second and third. Twitter's always first. I know some of you were like, Rob, we don't care. I get it, but, I have to see it all, so we'll give everyone a second to load in here and make sure everything's up and at 'em before we get going. What's up, everybody? Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Welcome to Get Your News On with Ron, the interview show of the week, and I am super excited for my guests. But first, quick shout-out to some of the folks who help make this show possible, our friends over at Indie Left. Indie Left is a place to find all the content creators you know and love. They update a list, they curate it, they update it twice a day. To find out everything they got going on and to subscribe to their Discord, check them out at independentleft.media. All right, so my guest today, I am really excited to talk to this guy. You know that one of the pillars of several of the pillars on Get Your News On with Ron is climate change and MMT, and this guy checks both of those boxes, and he checks them quite well. He really lays this stuff out in a very brilliant way, so I'm so excited to talk to him. He is a professor of economics at Denison University out in Ohio, near where I grew up, and he is also the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. Please welcome in the show, welcome to the show, Dr. Fadl Kaboub. Dr. Kaboub, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. So let's start in the MMT world. You and for anyone not in the know, we'll do a really quick. MMT basically stands for Modern Monetary Theory, and I'll actually turn this over to you. If you had to just give the quick elevator 1-minute pitch on what MMT really is, what do you say?
Well, a couple of things. The first thing is to recognize that we're talking about the monetary sovereignty of the federal government, not states and municipalities at the local level, because those they have to tax in order to spend, they have to borrow in order to spend. But the federal government has this unique power, which is the power of the purse. And we're not saying that the federal government has infinite spending capacity, that we should print money left and right and spend on everything without ever having to worry about it. But it says basically that the spending capacity of the federal government is constrained by the risk of inflation. And the risk of inflation is determined by a couple of things. One is our capacity as a country to produce things. So the productive capacity. Do we have the materials, the technology, the skills, the workforce to produce everything we need? And if we have a shortage of productive capacity, then we're going to face inflation pressure if we keep spending more and more. And the second risk of inflation, which I think your listeners will be very attuned to and interested in, which is the risk of inflation that comes from abusive market power, where you have key players in the economy who can raise prices simply because they can or because we let them. Now, the good news about the risk of inflation is that we do have, presumably in a democracy, a federal government, 535 lawmakers that we elect in a democratic system, whose job is supposed to be to tax and regulate abusive power out of existence. But if they're brought to you by super PACs, they're not going to do that, which means we don't have a democracy. The good news is that building additional productive capacity means creating millions of jobs, means creating a more prosperous economy. So the power of the purse is not just on the spending side, it's on the taxing and regulating as well. And MMT is basically saying that we have plenty of potential in this country for a much more equitable, prosperous, just and green society than what we're told. So who are the people who oppose climate policies, who oppose a much more just and equitable society? It's the 535 people, give or take, that we send to Washington, D.C., the super PACs that sponsor them, the media companies that spin their stories, and the lobbying firms that push for those policies. We outnumber them, and MMT is just trying to shine a bright light on the potential and empower and educate and mobilize people to truly democratize the system to reach our potential.
So you kind of answered my second question in that first answer there, but if we can get like a little hyper specific, one of the common things that people throw against MMT, even other economists in outlets like the New York Times and stuff like that, like, oh, MMT just doesn't take inflation into account, and surely just putting this currency into society will cause all kinds of inflation, and it really is just that simple. How do you combat that, and how is that not true?
Well, it's not true because I'm an MMT economist, and ask any MMT economist will tell you that we're obsessed with the risk of inflation. It's really at the center of what we do. We're just saying that what most people and mainstream economists usually believe is the source of inflation is wrong. And number two, what they usually believe is a solution to inflation is actually misleading and dangerous to some extent. I'll give you two examples. The example that everybody uses against MMT, which is the inflation of the 70s. We know that, what happens when we have inflation and how we deal with it. And number two, the current inflation cycle that we're living through right now and how they're trying to hijack the narrative about what's actually causing inflation. Let's start with our situation today. Pre-pandemic, in the US, we have four major drivers of inflation, four major sectors. That's real estate, that's energy and transportation, healthcare, and education. And that's pre-COVID. And with COVID, we've had the additional global disruptions to supply chains, shipping costs, and it's all related to the COVID disruptions, to the virus shutting down and restarting industries around the world and so on. And in all of these sectors, what you notice, those four areas pre-pandemic, we have two things. One is abusive market power, and two, lack of productive capacity that actually excludes people from energy and transportation, from housing, from education, from healthcare in particular. And that kind of abusive market power is not going to go away by spending less, and it's not going to go away by relying on the private sector to solve it. It only goes away by two things. One is us taking charge and building additional productive capacity, and two, taxing and regulating their abusive market power out of existence and making those markets more inclusive, more democratic, more competitive. So that's pre-COVID. And with COVID, of course, we have the additional supply chain disruptions. What is the mainstream narrative about inflation? They say, oh, what's causing the inflation that we're experiencing right now is too much federal government spending on the poor, on the unemployed, on poor children during the pandemic. All that COVID relief is causing too much demand, and the economy can't keep up with that demand. So what we need to do is tame the demand. And that's what the Federal Reserve Bank is explicitly saying. They're saying we're going to raise interest rates, make the cost of borrowing more expensive for businesses and households and consumers, and we're going to try to tame the level of demand. How do we tame it? If you create unemployment, actually create unemployment, you take away people's income, at least some people's income, that reduces their demand for goods and services. And that's how we deal with inflation. It's literally by throwing innocent people under the bus to save the economy from this inflation cycle. Instead, the MMT answer is saying, you're not going to, fight inflation when the source of inflation is abusive market power. Raising the interest rate does nothing to the abusive market power of corporations, does nothing to fix the supply chain disruptions from the global economy. If anything, you're throwing people under the bus, causing unemployment, and leaving, and if anything, exacerbating in some cases, the abusive market power that's fueling inflation. That's kind of our current situation today. And that's why I keep saying if we lose this debate about what's causing inflation right now, for decades, we're going to hear the mainstream narrative saying, oh, what caused the inflation of the pandemic was too much federal spending on the poor, on the homeless, on those kids we tried to pull out of poverty. So we should never do it again. And then we're going to say, and how we fix that inflation is by having the Federal Reserve Bank do the right thing, which is raise interest rates and be tough and break the back of inflation. That's exactly how they hijacked the narrative in the 70s. In the 70s, they blamed the inflation of the 70s on too much demand, on labor unions having too much purchasing power, on consumers having too much demand, when the actual source of inflation was a conflict in the Middle East that triggered oil prices to go through the roof, and that rippled through the entire global economy because oil is a basic input in everything we produce and consume and ship, heating and cooling and so on. But they hijacked the narrative and blamed it on the federal government, blamed it on welfare state, blamed it on the welfare queens and all that racist narrative of the 1970s that people still believe in today and still repeat to this day. And what ended the inflation pressures of the 70s and early 80s was actually finding a peaceful resolution to the conflict in the Middle East. Signing a peace treaty in the Middle East ended OPEC prices going through the roof. The second thing that helped in the meanwhile was Jimmy Carter deregulating the natural gas industry in the US to find a substitute, a cheaper local substitute for the imported expensive oil as at least a source of producing electricity. That's the episode that started the fracking frenzy, by the way, for natural gas in the US and your hometown and your home state and here in Ohio and across the country. So But what happened was the narrative that was built around the inflation of the 70s was to blame it on the welfare state, to blame it on the poor, on the unemployed, on federal spending, rather than actually identifying the source. And then the victory, celebration of, winning the fight against inflation was the Fed did it. Paul Volcker broke the back of inflation by doubling interest rates, raising interest rates, and crushing the economy. It created mass unemployment and threw millions of people under the bus in the name of fighting inflation. So that's why we need to learn our history. We need to learn our lessons. And we're about to experience a similar hijacking of this narrative. That's why it's crucial for the public to be able to call their bluff when they say we have to do this, we have to throw some people under the bus. Because they're not saying it explicitly. They're saying, well, trust us, we're the professionals, we know how to deal with inflation here.
Do you think on their end it's just an oversimplification, or do you think it's more deceptive than that?
It's a mix. I mean, it depends on who you're talking about. Sure. For professional economists, many of them are actually worse than the general public and politicians. They're just brainwashed into a very narrow theoretical framework about what causes inflation and how you address it. There's also an ideological layer for economists and policymakers about having a small government, because essentially what MMT is suggesting about tackling the sources of inflation at the source is a couple of things. One, increase productive capacity in healthcare, education, energy and transportation, and housing, the actual sources of inflation. And two, tax and regulate the abusive market power of key players in those industries. Well, there was a name for this thing that we put together a few years ago that does more or less what I'm just describing. Oh, it's called the Green New Deal. That's why the Green New Deal had housing for all. That's why it had education for all. That's why it was about decarbonizing the system to reduce the power and influence of oil and gas companies. And that's why it had Medicare for all as a core pillar. It wasn't the favorite shopping list of the progressive movement put together. It was well designed to actually spend aggressively to transform the economy, make it more just, more equitable, greener, cleaner, inclusive, but to do it in a way that goes directly to the source of inflation pressure points and directly to the source of abusive market power in the system. That's why it was a dangerous program, because it was tackling the core of American inequities and abuse of power in the system. But of course, they never tell you that. They tell, well, this will cause too much government spending. And we know this. Too much government spending will cause hyperinflation. It can't be done. This is pie in the sky. It can't happen. Well, let me tell you about the biggest government spending in the history of this country. It happened during World War II. And what's so special about that moment is that World War II came right after the Great Depression, the most miserable time in U.S. history. There was no money to be taxed, no money to be borrowed in the U.S. or globally. It was the Great Depression globally. So how did we go from the most miserable time to the biggest, most expensive government program to win World War II? Imagine if at the time people thought, well, we don't really have a lot of money. We can't afford this big war to fight the Nazis. What we should do is be reasonable and responsible. Do it one little bit at a time. Send them 5,000 troops every other month and see if we can win this war. Of course, that wasn't the solution, and that wasn't the way to win the war. We went all the way in with the most expensive program in the midst of a Great Depression. How did we pay for it? The power of the purse. The federal government was able to pre-fund the war. It didn't borrow money or tax money from anybody. The concern at the time was not finding the money. We know where to find the money. It's the federal government can create the money. The concern at the time was, what if we spent all of this money to build all of these tanks and airplanes to win the war, but then the workers we pay those wages to, they're going to go out on a shopping spree. They want to buy a car. They want to buy a house. It's a free country. It's a democracy. How can we deal with the inflation pressure from all of that spending, knowing that we literally have no new houses during the war? No new.
Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwin, and you are watching The Political Vigilante.
I was going to say, YouTube just completely took me down here. So, I'm going to switch it up, finish off with this guy. I've been beating around the bush, so let's just go ahead and say hi to Graham for a little while, right?
That's truth.
And this affects me because I
coming
live in
up
Florida right now.
From underneath Wayne Manor, somewhere in the outskirts of Gotham City.
And
we talk a lot about climate change on this show, and we talk about rising sea levels and how it's going to impact places like Florida. And this new report, the new global report that just came out, Florida is already seeing climate change. New global report says it could worsen. The nearly 2,000-page report had a global focus, but Florida was repeatedly used as an example of a place where the impacts of climate change were already being felt, both economically and environmentally. Climate change has already changed places like Florida permanently and irreversibly. This is in the report. They're like, oh, it's irreversible in Florida.
It's hot as balls.
Nobody's scared or alarmed? We still have a chance to reverse this.
Here.
No?
Too hot.
Just want to keep pumping money into Ukraine and NATO and war. And okay, great. It's affecting coral reefs, leading to higher property values and increasing inequality for vulnerable populations in the state. Tidal flooding worsened by sea rise has led to almost $500 million in lost real estate value from 2005 to 2016 in Miami-Dade County alone. That's just South Florida. There's a lot of nice beachfront property and real estate all up and down both coasts in Florida, the Gulf side and the Atlantic side. What $500 million just in Miami-Dade County in a 11-year stretch? What's Fort Lauderdale? What's Tampa? What's Jacksonville? What's all that? Those are all coastal cities. Pensacola, they're all coastal cities.
Yep.
That's pretty alarming.
Sarasota.
Miami-Dade's effort to raise roads and build stormwater pumps have raised property values, leading to inequality for vulnerable populations. Floridians could be forced to retreat from the coast as sea levels rise. Florida's coral reefs are bleaching and drying as temperatures rise. As coral reefs die, Florida could lose up to $55 billion in reef-related tourism money by 2100. Jesus. Harmful algal blooms along Florida's west coast, spurred by climate change, led to massive economic losses. The fishermen, the fisher boats, right? That's a big business in Florida.
I don't. Down here, red algae, like it completely shut down the beaches for huge periods of time. Come, buddy. Can't go to the beach. Can't go to the beach. My buddy. Yeah, can't go to the beach. Just red coral.
Charter fishing boats, gone.
Red algae day.
Snorkel boat tours, all that stuff. Can't do it if there's nothing there.
Can't go outside. Red algae.
I've talked about rising. I've done numerous videos on how Florida is the canary in the coal mine because it's low lying. All the coasts are going to be affected, but Florida's going to be affected first. I've talked about they have plans to. People are going to have to potentially evacuate Florida. Attempts to fix the problem by installing new stormwater pumps and raising roads and buildings may have actually made inequality worse by rising property values in Miami-Dade. There's a neighborhood that's on high ground that they've now just pushed out, gentrified. The wealthy people are just going to buy up all the high. You live in high ground, the wealthy people are going to come buy you out.
High ground in Florida. It's like,
that's insane. You think you're going to have beachfront property in 10 years when Miami's underwater? Like, what are you doing?
We're all underground.
That building that collapsed a year or so ago? It was because rising sea levels deteriorated the foundation. And so now the city's come in and done all these special.
There's a little city up north of me that it's a smaller town, but you walk around and they, a third of the time, at least a third of the houses that have built in the last 10 years are on stilt. Like up, the first floor is an empty floor, and then underneath they park their vehicles, like their open air garage, and then they literally have like pull downs from the in their, they pull things down so they can like literally have a garage downstairs without having a garage, and then they go up steps to their house because they know that water is a very regular thing. Flooding from hurricanes is a very regular thing, and so they have their house on these very sturdy stilts.
All these condos and buildings and everything like that, which is again raising the cost, raising the homeowners' dues, raising the rents on people. Still might not be enough. I've told you on this show, we did a video on how they were, they hired the Army Corps of Engineers was going to build a seawall, and then they realized, oh, that won't work.
Yeah.
Because Florida, I believe, is like limestone, so the water will just seep up through it. You can't block it with a wall. Jesus. It was one of the Global Report's key examples of maladaptation when efforts to address climate change backfire by raising greenhouse gas emissions or making life harder for vulnerable people. This is in the Miami Herald, by the way. The newspaper that's done a lot of excellent reporting exposing Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and all the people related to that.
Yeah.
This is the Miami Herald. Put this out there.
All right, they got me knocked off.
Florida gets another $404 million for climate change prep. It needs billions more. This is February 1st of this year. This is, again, another article in the